Joining us today, and happy Water Awareness Month from the Arizona Department of Water Resources. I want to quickly remind participants, please mute yourselves during the presentation so we can hear the presenters. We will have time for questions at the end of the presentation, so during that time, I'd encourage anyone interested in asking something to unmute yourselves at that time and ask your question, or type it out in the chat and I'll read that for you. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared through the ADWR YouTube page for those who missed it. I'm going to provide a brief Water Awareness Month introduction and then we'll continue with our webinar. The Arizona Department of Water Resources and our conservation partners from around the state invite you, your family, and your neighbors to join in the celebration of Water Awareness Month, or WAM as we like to call it. The WAM website was first launched in 2011 and is overflowing with ideas and activities to help you learn more about water conservation and become more aware of our state's most precious resource, water. The availability and quality of our water supply is critical to our quality of life. Therefore, this essential and precious resource was recognized by Arizona's governor in 2008 with an executive order that designates April as Water Awareness Month. Many thanks to Arizona's water awareness partners from around the state who contribute events, tips, and resources to the website and help promote water awareness. Next, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Leah Harrison, who is presenting today's webinar titled History of Water in the Valley and SRP. Leah Harrison is the Manager of Research, Archives and Heritage at Salt River Project. Leah earned her bachelor's in history education from the University of Arizona. A native Phoenician, Leah taught history and drama for 3 years before pursuing her master's degree in public history and a certificate in scholarly publishing from Arizona State University. She has been with SRP for 10 years, analyzing the history of water and power in the valley and managing a team that oversees SRP's archival and artifact collections, along with the SRP Heritage Center. Leah, thank you very much for joining us today, and over to you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Leah Harrison. I'm the Manager of Research, Archives and Heritage here at SRP, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about the history of water in the valley from really the SRP kind of story and telling the SRP story. So if you're not familiar with SRP, it stands for Salt River Project. SRP is a water and power provider here in the Salt River Valley. We've been serving the valley since 1903, so about to celebrate our 120th anniversary next year in 2023. And we deliver around 800,000 acre feet of water annually. If you're not familiar with an acre foot as a unit of measurement, if you take a football field and fill that with roughly about a foot of water, that's around an acre foot. So we deliver around 800,000 acre feet of water annually, and then we serve over 1 million power customers here in the Salt River Valley. And I'll be telling a little bit of that story today. If we move into the next slide, that would be great. So before I jump in, I want to explain the slide layout a little bit. You're going to see some icons in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Those are going to change as we move forward in time, and they just give you some context for what's happening here in the valley at a particular snapshot in time. So the tractor you see there is the cultivated acreage in Maricopa County. The people are the population at the time in Maricopa County. The wavy lines are SRP's water storage capacity, and that's going to be measured in acre feet. And the light bulb is the number of SRP's power customers at any given point in time. So just to give you some context, I'll kind of tell you a big picture how things are changing as we move forward in time. We'll definitely have time for questions at the end, so please feel free if you have a question. I would love to answer that, whether it relates to the content of the presentation, or if you have another SRP history another SRP history question, I'd be happy to take that at the end of the presentation as well. So to tell the story of water here in the Salt River Valley, we have to go pretty far back in time and talk about a group of people who lived here in the valley, really the valley's early indigenous population. I'm going to use the term Hugam. You may hear other terms for this group of people who lived here in the valley and built a very complex network of canals and laterals, a very robust water delivery system here in the Salt River Valley that ultimately spanned over 500 miles. And they maintained this system for more than 1,000 years. So I said, SRP is celebrating our 120th anniversary next year. This original sort of system here in the valley was utilized, and it changed over time, but a system was maintained here for more than 1,000 years, which is pretty incredible. This was a remarkably well-engineered system. It was really well planned, well thought out, and pretty reliable. So of course, those folks understood that in order to maintain life here in the desert, they needed a reliable water supply. So if you move forward in time to the late 1800s, we have more folks arriving here in the Salt River Valley during that time frame, made that very same connection, right? They needed a reliable water supply in order to support life here in the Salt River Valley. So those folks who moved here in the late 1800s actually began uncovering some of those very same waterways that the valley's early indigenous population had built up, and began reutilizing, rebuilding, building on those same waterways. So it's a really amazing legacy here in the Salt River Valley of using water and moving water. So if you look at the map here on your screen, the faint gray lines are some of those very, very early canals that were put in place by the valley's sort of early indigenous population. And then if you look at the dashed lines, those are more historic, so kind of late 1800s timeframe. And then the blue lines are the system that SRP maintains today. And you can really see how much overlap there is between those eras in time of water use here in the Salt River Valley. So it's important to recognize that history here in this place. So we'll move to the next slide. So those early settlers in the late 1800s, moving to this place, building up a canal system. Each of those canals was kind of built separately. So just something to think about, that will sort of change in the future. They're all operated independently. They're built by different groups of folks, utilized in kind of different ways, but they're building out that canal system. And they understood, those folks living here at this time, where that water came from that was flowing through the river system and into those canals that they were building up. And they understood that that water came primarily from snowmelt on what we refer to as a watershed. And the watershed that feeds the system that SRP maintains is here on this map. You can kind of see the outline. It is all the streams and tributaries that feed the Salt and Verde rivers. So those early residents wanted to protect that watershed. They understood how important that watershed was. So in 1897, Arizona's territorial legislature, and recall this is many years before Arizona becomes a state, actually asked the federal government to set some of these lands aside as forest reserves in order to protect them from things like timbering or grazing, which might have an impact on the watershed and then in turn have an impact on the water supply here for the valley. So this is an example of some of the really careful planning and thinking that's gone into setting up the water supply that we utilize today here in the Salt River Valley. They were really looking to the future and thinking long term and asking that these areas be set aside. So there's about 13,000 square miles of land that makes up that watershed that feeds into that surface water system that SRP helps to manage today. We can move to the next slide. So we've got the canal system being built up in the late 1800s. We've got that watershed, people really thinking about protecting that watershed. Even with those kind of factors in place, there's a couple of factors that come into play that cause people living here in the Salt River Valley to look to the federal government for some help around the turn of the century. Some issues with reliability in the valley's water supply. And the first of those was overuse, right? There were more claims to water flowing through the river system than there was actual water moving through that system. So that was an issue, thinking about that use and those claims to that water. Another big motivator during this time period was flood. There were some pretty serious floods that moved through the valley, probably most notably the flood of 1891, which caused a lot of damage to existing infrastructure. And these folks primarily at this time are farmers. If that water can't get where it needs to go at the right time, that is a major issue. So flooding was a problem. However, the primary motivator during this time period was drought. There's a very serious drought here in the valley from 1898 to 1904. And it was in the midst of this drought that folks looked to the idea of reclamation. And at the time, reclamation really meant reclaiming arid lands by building irrigation infrastructure. It was a very popular idea around the turn of the century. It was really kind of a social movement. People saw this as a way to build up population centers in the Western United States, build a reclamation project. People will move out, we'll set up this agricultural system in the Western United States. So reclamation was a really popular idea. The people living here in the Salt River Valley wanted to take advantage of that. They wanted to build a reclamation project here in the Salt River Valley. And It just so happened that the president, Theodore Roosevelt, who was in office at the time, was a proponent of reclamation. The National Reclamation Act was signed into law in 1902. And the National Reclamation Act is really critical, particularly for SRP, of course, but for water here in the valley in general. And there are a couple of key provisions to know about the Reclamation Act. So the first thing the Reclamation Act did was it provided federal funding in the form of loans in order to build irrigation infrastructure. It also provided some engineering expertise. A lot of these projects were fairly unprecedented, so that engineering expertise was really important. It required that the title for anything built with reclamation funds had to remain with the federal government, which it does even today. And I will talk about that a little bit later on. And then lastly, the Reclamation Act required that the debt for these projects, remember these were loans, had to be borne equally among the folks who are going to benefit from those projects. So it's that provision that leads directly to the formation of kind of what is what we refer to today as sort of one half of what we call SRP, and that is the Salt River Valley Water Users Association, which was formed in 1903. As I said, folks living here in the valley wanted to build a reclamation project. They wanted to take advantage of that Reclamation Act. They came together, they formed what we call the association in 1903, and in doing that, actually put their land up as collateral in order to secure those federal reclamation loans to build a reclamation project here in the valley. If you think about it, that is a pretty bold move on the part of these folks, right? They were mostly farmers. Their land is their livelihood during this time period. So to come together and take on, really the risk of building this kind of project is pretty remarkable. So with the association in place, they were able to kind of put forward the Salt River project as a possibility, as one of the early reclamation projects. And in fact, the Salt River Reclamation Project was selected as one of the first 5 federal reclamation projects in the United States. So we have this kind of local entity, the association, that is facilitating that repayment of these reclamation loans, but also they're really acting as a liaison between the federal government and the people living here in the Salt River Valley at the time to help facilitate building this reclamation project. So we can move to the next slide. So what were they going to build? Some of you probably already know. The sort of big cornerstone of the project is Theodore Roosevelt Dam. And Theodore Roosevelt Dam, the site of the dam had actually been identified as a potential dam site in the 1800s, and a couple of small enterprises came together, private enterprises that tried to build a dam at this site and just could not get the financing to work. It really took this partnership between the federal government and the Salt River Valley Water Users Association to get this dam built. Many of you, I'm sure, have been to Roosevelt Dam. If you've been to Roosevelt Dam, you know that even today, it's not in a super easy to get to location. I mean, of course, that's why it's a great place for a dam. But in 1903, there was really no good way to move people or machinery or supplies back and forth to the dam site. So the first thing they had to do before they could start really building the dam itself was build a road. At the time, it was called the Mesa Roosevelt Road. Today, we call it the Apache Trail. That was constructed between 1903 and 1905. By 1905, when the trail is opened up, it was moving over 1 million pounds of freight back and forth on the Apache Trail each year. I don't know if anyone's done the Apache Trail in a car. I have, and made me extremely nervous. I cannot imagine moving freight back and forth to the dam site in a wagon on the Apache Trail. It had to be quite an experience. But that roadway was critical for the dam's construction. The second thing they needed before they could really start building the dam itself was an energy source. Roosevelt Dam, as I said, it's in a remote location. They needed some sort of energy source to power some of the machinery to build the dam. So they were very creative. They used the water, or the source that was there, which was water, the natural drop at the dam site, which is what made it a great place to build a dam. And they generated hydroelectricity to power the machinery to build Roosevelt Dam. And that's an early example of something that you'll see throughout the history of reclamation projects, which is called the reclamation principle. And that is the idea that water and power are partners. So I am going to talk, I'm going to sneak a little bit of power in here today because I am from SRP and we're going to have both. But that's kind of the early example there, that reclamation principle, water and power are partners. So Roosevelt Dam is finished in 1911. You can see from the wavy lines, we have gone from 0 water storage capacity to over 1.2 million acre feet of water storage capacity with Roosevelt Dam alone. It was then, of course, and is today the largest storage reservoir on the system that SRP operates. When it was finished, it was the largest masonry structure in the world. It was the largest human-made lake in the world, and was really an engineering marvel, especially for the time period in which it was built. We had a huge dedication ceremony. Theodore Roosevelt himself came to the dam's dedication ceremony. He rode up the Apache Trail in a convertible in 1911, gave a very rousing speech. He said two things he was most proud of from his presidency were the construction of the Panama Canal and the passage of the National Reclamation Act. He was pretty pleased to have this dam named after him. He gave a speech at ASU a couple of days later. He did sort of a whole tour of the valley when he came through in 1911. On the steps of Old Main, he gave this speech, and he said he really felt like if we got our irrigation projects in order here, we could see 75 to 100,000 people living in this valley someday. So I'm sure, as you all know, we have very far surpassed those expectations, and you'll see from our population icon that we do it really quickly. But that gives you an idea of some of the magnitude of what we're talking about for this project for Roosevelt Dam. That was kind of a crazy idea that we could have 100,000 people living here. So I'm going to go back in time a little bit if we move forward to the next slide and talk about a couple of things that happened while Roosevelt Dam was being built. So I mentioned that flood or that drought from 1898 to 1904. That drought culminates in a pretty serious flood in 1905. And that flood causes some damage to the existing infrastructure here in the valley. It damages the canal system. But the biggest issue that it created is it wiped out the diversion dam that was in place. And the job of a diversion dam is to move water from the river system into the canal system. So without the diversion dam, water is not going where it needs to. And that was a major issue. So as part of the project, the federal government and the folks here in the valley kind of said, you know, we should really build a new diversion dam now that this one has had some issues from this flood. So in 1908, they constructed Granite Reef Diversion Dam, which you can see there on the left. Looks very similar today, and technically was the first dam on SRP system, because even though it's not a storage reservoir, it was finished before Roosevelt Dam. So Granite Reef is a really, really important piece of infrastructure that was built around the same time frame. The other thing that comes out of this major flood is, I think folks realize, as I mentioned, those canals were all being operated separately. They were independent organizations. And the damage that was caused by this flood, I think, caused people to pause and say, you know, if we're building this dam system, we're building this reclamation project, we might want to think about operating these canals as one entity as part of that project. So the federal government begins purchasing the existing canal system here in the valley as part of the Salt River Project, starting in 1906 with the North Side system and completing that in 1909 with the South Side system. So by 1911, we have a brand new diversion dam, a unified canal system, and we have Roosevelt Dam completed. So the water picture here for the Salt River Valley has completely transformed really in less than a decade since the passage of the Reclamation Act. So pretty remarkable infrastructure that was put in place, but also the speed at which this happened is pretty impressive. We can move to our next slide. So as I told you, I was going to sneak a little power in here. So another important thing that happens during Roosevelt Dam's construction, that power canal is generating electricity even before the dam's generation comes online. And it was so successful that the federal government and the association were able to build a transmission line down from Roosevelt Dam into what was at the time the Mesa Switchyard and start providing power here in the valley. So the first electric service for SRP here in the valley is 1909. And again, you're going to see that reclamation principle because a lot of that power went to well pumps early on. So you've got that water power connection again, even with the early deliveries here in the valley. We can move to our next slide. So Roosevelt Dam is finished in 1911. By 1917, the association and the federal government have negotiated an agreement that is going to transfer the operation and maintenance of the project from the federal government to the association. It was always the intent of the Reclamation Act that a local entity would take on the direct operation and maintenance of these reclamation projects. And the Salt River Project was the first project that was fully turned over to a local entity to operate and maintain. So they signed an agreement in 1917. This agreement is still in place today. More than 100 years later, SRP and the federal government are still operating under this agreement. It kind of lays out that relationship. A couple of key provisions in this agreement. One, transfer the operation and maintenance from the federal government to the association. Two, it set the repayment amount that folks who put their lands up and joined the association had to pay back for the construction of the project, which came in around $10.8 million, and that's 1917 dollars. Around $10.8 million, that is what they had to pay back over time. It required that the title to any infrastructure built with reclamation loans, reclamation funds had to stay with the federal government, which, as I mentioned, was part of the Reclamation Act. So SRP does not own the dams or canals that we operate. We operate them on behalf of the federal government as part of this reclamation project. And then lastly, a really important provision that becomes pretty critical almost immediately is that the association was able to keep power revenues and utilize those dollars in a much more flexible way than many other reclamation projects. Many other reclamation projects had to use their power revenue immediately to pay back their debt to the federal government. But SRP, the association, was able to negotiate a little bit more flexibility in that agreement. So this agreement, as I said, still in place today. I love to point out this wonderful building here. This was the originally Bureau of Reclamation headquarters here in the Valley. Then it became the association SRP headquarters. It was located at Van Buren and 2nd Avenue. We were in that building operating until the mid-1950s when we moved into our headquarters in Tempe. And it was often referred to by folks here in the Valley as the Water Temple. And unfortunately, it is no longer there today. I always get that question. It is no longer there today, but you can see there is a canal running right in front of this building. That is, in fact, the Salt River Valley Canal, which was the earliest modern canal built here in the Salt River Valley. So it's kind of a perfect spot for Reclamation SRP, later SRP's headquarters. So we can move to our next slide. In the 1920s, as we move into this decade, were a really difficult decade here in the Salt River Valley. We had, at the time, SRP, the association, and the federal government are signing that agreement in 1917. We're looking at World War I, which is taking place during that time period. And actually, during World War I, a lot of people living here in the Valley started growing cotton in order to support the demand during the war effort. Well, when the war ends, demand for cotton falls, the price of cotton falls, and we've got a real economic crisis for the folks living in the Salt River Valley. So of course, they were having a hard time paying their assessments, their annual assessment, which went towards that debt to the federal government for constructing the Salt River Project Reclamation Project. At the time, SRP had a pretty visionary leader. His name was C.C. Cragen, and he came up with a plan, which we just celebrated the centennial in February of this plan, to build some additional dams on the lower Salt River, use the revenue from the sale of hydro generation, generate electricity, use the revenue from the sale of that electricity to then pay back that debt to the federal government. Initially, people were kind of like, lukewarm on this plan, right? They had a lot of debt. We were going to build more infrastructure. Cragen was very creative in the financing of this project, issued some bonds, actually pre-sold some of the power output of the dams, which then helped finance their construction, but also meant that there was a buyer in place for that electricity when this generation came online. And this is the era in which we see the addition of Horse Mesa, Mormon Flat, and Stewart Mountain dams to SRP systems. So we are increasing water storage capacity and also increasing power generation capacity. So this is a big moment from kind of both perspectives. From this point on, SRP is able to generate electricity year-round. Prior to that, we're really only moving water during the irrigating season through Roosevelt Dam and some small canal hydro. But now with the flexibility to move water between this system on the Salt River, we can generate electricity year-round, which means that the Valley is really on the cutting edge when it comes to rural electrification. So providing electrical service to individual homes, we're really about 10 years ahead of the rest of the Valley when it comes to rural electrification. So this plan is extremely important, increasing water storage capacity and electric power generation. So we can move to our next slide. The 1930s, again, another really hard decade here in the Salt River Valley. Of course, we have the Great Depression that's happening on a national, international level. And then we also had a drought here in the Valley. So in the midst of that drought, people are looking for opportunities to increase water storage capacity, right? And so the association, SRP, got the opportunity to build a dam on the Verde River and went to the federal government to look at financing, how they were going to build this project. And the federal government said, you have a lot of debt if you can find a way to restructure this debt, refinance this debt, then maybe we can help out with financing for this project, this additional dam on the Verde River. So folks who are kind of working in the association came back to the drawing board. They decided the best course of action would be to form a separate entity, a new entity, an agricultural improvement district, which under the state statutes here in Arizona, an agricultural improvement district is a political subdivision of the state. So as a political subdivision of the state, agricultural improvement districts can issue tax-free bonds. There's a lot of flexible financing options there. So in 1937, the Salt River Project Agricultural Improvement and Power District was formed, which we just call the district. And that is sort of the second half of what today makes up SRP. So you've got the Salt River Valley Water Users Association, which today operates and maintains most of the water delivery system. And then the district, which operates and maintains the power system and kind of really the rest of SRP's operations. So those two entities in place by 1937, they were able to build a dam on the Verde River, which of course, if you're familiar at all with SRP system, you probably know is Bartlett Dam. Bartlett Dam is a really interesting story. It was the first multiple arch dam that was built by the Bureau of Reclamation. It's really a dam design that's reflective of the time period in which it was built. A multiple arch dam requires a lot more labor, but a lot less material. So in the 1930s, during the Depression era, this was actually a really, not only is it obviously an efficient dam design, but it was a really great solution for building a dam during the 1930s, put a lot of people to work and used a lot less material than many other options. So I'm going to just note at the same time, all of SRP's electric generation up until the late 1930s was hydro. So in the midst of a drought, that's something to think about. We have this sort of electrification happening. So we begin thinking about diversifying that fuel mix. And in the late 1930s, SRP built our first non-hydroelectric generation resource, which was the Crosscut diesel plant, which is no longer in operation. But it is a very cool building that is still in SRP's kind of system. It's a neat kind of Art Deco Gothic building that was built in the late 1930s. So we're thinking about that diverse fuel mix. We'll move to the next slide. The second dam that SRP builds on the Verde River is Horseshoe Dam. And Horseshoe Dam was built in the midst of World War II. This dam was sort of part of a complicated exchange agreement between SRP and Phelps Dodge, which was a mining corporation here in Arizona. Phelps Dodge was doing copper mining to support the demand during World War II. And in order to do that, they needed a little bit more water to make those operations work. So because they were taking water off of a part of the watershed that feeds SRP's system, they agreed to build Horseshoe Dam as part of that exchange to kind of make things whole, provide some additional water storage capacity. So Horseshoe Dam, again, very much a product of its time. It is an earth and rock fill dam. During World War II, obviously labor and materials extremely scarce. So this was the solution that was most effective for that time period. I mean, it was built, as I said, in the midst of that wartime era. Some of the gates that are on the top of the dam today were added a little bit later on. And of course, the spillways and sort of the top of the dam is not earth and rock fill, it's concrete, but the actual dam itself is an earth and rock fill dam. So if we'll move to our next slide. So most of y'all are probably familiar with this part of the story. Post-World War II, we just see tremendous growth here in the Salt River Valley. Our population increases by, double, triple-digit percentages post-World War II. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Generally speaking, people in the United States at this time are moving westward. They're kind of moving to those Sunbelt states. A lot of folks trained in Arizona in the Valley during the war and really liked it, came back when the war ended. Air conditioning becomes part of your home mortgage in the early 1950s. And as we all know, is an extremely important part of a comfortable life here in the Salt River Valley. So there's a lot of factors that kind of lead into this. But of course, this changes land use in the territory that SRP serves. I mean, changes power use as well. So this is people who are in an agricultural setting use water and power very differently from folks who are in an urban setting, right? So you can see these photos here really kind of illustrate how that's happening and how quickly that's happening. That image there on the far left is reclamation in action, right? We're reclaiming those arid lands. Less than 20 years later, that's almost completely subdivided. And then this photo on the right here is from 1996, and we're even more filled in. So this necessitates some changes to the way that SRP delivers water and power, because the nature of that land use is changing during this post-war period. So if we move into our next slide, I'll talk about a couple of those changes that we put into place. So one of the first things that SRP does is to take advantage of some financing that's made available by Congress as part of a 1949 Rehabilitation and Betterment Program. And the goal of that program is to modernize water delivery infrastructure. So this is the point in time when we start to see canals being lined. We're seeing laterals being lined. We're seeing laterals being piped. They're going underground. Here in the valley, kind of prior to this time frame, you would see water everywhere. Every major street had a lateral on the side of it, which is a smaller piece of water delivery infrastructure. Water was really everywhere. Well, as we're building out our roadways, things are expanding. We're building parking lots and things like that. Transportation is difficult when you have open waterways. So we start to see some of those laterals be piped during this time frame. Things are being lined, as I said. So really modernizing that water delivery system. The other thing that SRP begins to do during this time period is to deliver water directly to cities at water treatment facilities. So as I said, SRP, we deliver a lot of water, almost 800,000 acre feet these days. We deliver raw water. And of course, folks like, when we're pulling things out of the tap in our house, we would really like to have treated water, of course. So SRP begins delivering water to cities, starting with the city of Phoenix in 1952. We'll deliver the water directly to the water treatment facility, and then the city will move that water to SRP's customers on our behalf as part of those agreements. And today, SRP works with 10 different cities in this way. But we started in the 1950s with City of Phoenix. We can move to our next slide. So we're continuing during this time period to increase power generation. Along with that population boom comes more demand for electricity. So SRP is kind of building up that generation portfolio during this time period. And one of the really cool projects that we took on in the early 1970s was adding a pump storage, a pump back system to some of the lower salt dams. And so what this system does is it allows SRP on a hot summer afternoon to generate hydroelectricity, and then at night, when demand is much lower, we could pump the water back up in the reservoir above and do it again the next day. So you really get a lot of use and really some real bang for your buck on those hydro generation resources with this type of system. So we added this to some of the lower salt dams in the early 1970s. I love this picture here on the bottom left of just the pipes, like the giant infrastructure that's going into the dams as part of this project. It always blows my mind, the scale of this system. So it's really cool. And this is again, really interesting project, still utilizing this system today. We can move to our next slide. So there's a conversation that kind of starts in the United States in the late 1970s, early 1980s around the safety of dams in the United States. There's a failure of Teton Dam in Idaho in 1976. It kicks off some of these conversations. Can the dams in the United States withstand a major flood event? And this conversation is really brought home here in the Valley in February of 1980. We had some serious rain events in 1978, kind of late 1970s, but 1980, there's a very serious storm on Valentine's Day that moves through the valley, and there was some real concern about infrastructure. Thankfully, the storm did not really materialize as large as it was predicted, although it did wipe out the Mill Avenue Bridge. So if anyone was here living in the valley at that time, you probably remember this storm and some of the damage that it did. But it kind of kicks off a conversation about the valley's dams and the dam systems around the valley. And I will note that the dams on SRP's system are built for water storage, and you would engineer a dam differently for flood control versus water storage. But Congress passed a couple of safety dams acts in the mid-1980s in particular. So SRP partnered with a number of entities in order to make some modifications to some of the dams on its system. And the biggest change was to Roosevelt Dam. So Roosevelt Dam, as part of these modifications, was raised 77 feet. The spillways were completely altered. And the dam looks very different today than it did when it was finished in 1911. But this adds increased water storage capacity. It added a measure of flood control as well. And I like to say that the original dam structure is still under there. They just added kind of a layer of concrete over it and lifted it up a little bit. So if you are at Roosevelt Lake on a day when the water level is a little lower, you can still see some of the original masonry on the back of Roosevelt Dam. But this is really, really critical. This project was finished in 1996. And as I said, provided some increased water storage capacity and a measure of flood control as well. Another really important piece of infrastructure that's put in place around the same time frame is an interconnect between SRP and the Central Arizona Project system. So Central Arizona Project is a reclamation project here in Arizona. The purpose for the Central Arizona Project is to move Colorado River water across the state into central and southern Arizona. So there's a large aqueduct that flows through the Central Arizona and down south. That moves this water. And so in the early 1990s, SRP and CAP built a connection that allows SRP to move water from the CAP system in through the SRP canal system, which we do for a variety of purposes, and I'll talk about some of those on the next slide. But this is a really important piece of infrastructure because it provides a lot of flexibility. It really opens the doorways to a lot of different ideas and projects that we maybe would not have been able to take on without this connection and this partnership. Let's move to our next slide. So one of the projects that interconnect really helps to facilitate is SRP operates a couple of underground storage projects. So we have one in the East Valley, Granite Reef Underground Storage Project, and one in the West Valley, which you can see here, which is the New River Agua River Underground Storage Project. The first of these projects began operations in the mid-1990s, and they are very, very successful. And what they allow SRP and lots of other partners to do is to move water into these storage areas, which it then can filter back down and help replenish underground water supplies. So we operate two of those in partnership with lots of entities, as I said. And then we also took on the operation, just in case many of you may have heard about this, SRP also took on the direct operation of what we are calling C.C. Craigan Dam. You may have heard of it referred to as Blue Ridge Reservoir. We changed the name when SRP took on operations in 2005, the 2005 timeframe. And this was part of the Arizona Water Settlements Act that SRP would take on the operation of this facility. It is owned by the federal government, as the other dams on SRP system are. And a lot of the water stored here really goes to northern Gila County. But SRP kind of operates and maintains this facility as well. So let's move to our next slide, which I think is our last slide. It is. So this is just like a real taste, a snapshot of kind of the SRP story. If you want to learn more, we have lots of opportunities to do that. We have a really robust website, srpnet.com/history. And on that site, you can find our book here available to download as a PDF, or I think there's an ebook version as well if you have a Nook or an Apple, if you use Apple Books. So you can download this. It's got really the big picture, full story of SRP's history, and that's available to read. We also have a really cool heritage map on our website that if you click through, you can open that up. It has location services enabled, so you can see some of the historic water and power infrastructure that's around you and learn more about all of that. We also have all of the public art that is on the canal system that SRP operates. All of the public art is listed in that atlas as well. So if you're interested in viewing some of that public art along the canal system, please take a look. There's also some other historic sites throughout that kind of influence the valley's history as well. You can also see kind of all the canal pathways. SRP's canal system is largely has pathways along the canal for folks to walk, bike, run, recreate, anything you could want to do. It's a really cool way to traverse the valley and kind of get an idea of a different transportation corridor. There's interpretive signage all along that system as well. So lots of cool opportunities to interact with SRP history. And with that, I will take any questions that folks have, either in the chat or feel free to ask away.
Great. Thank you very much, Leah. I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
you
That was
bet.
a great presentation. Yeah, so we have some time for some questions. One thing I really appreciated about your presentation is you had the legend in the bottom right that gave us the kind of ability to kind of keep tabs on what the population was doing. I did want to start off with a question. I know
Yeah.
we started talking about the indigenous cultures, canals. I was curious, do we have any way of kind of estimating the maximum size of the population that those canals were serving?
Yeah, that's a great question. And probably we have a wonderful archaeologist here at SRP who probably would be able to give you a better answer than I can. But I have heard upwards of 50,000 people. That's the estimate that I've heard. I don't know how totally accurate that is. I think that's a guess. But I will say, I think we do know that it was the only indigenous North American population to use irrigation to this scale and this level of engineering. I mean, it was an incredibly well-engineered system.
That's fascinating,
Yeah.
fascinating. And this is probably the largest amount I think I've heard about the early history. Specifically about the indigenous canals. Is there somewhere you would recommend for someone if looking for more information on that?
Yes, the Pueblo Grande Museum is a great resource. It's in Phoenix, kind of near the airport, right along the Grand Canal, what is today the Grand Canal, but it has got a lot of great information. You can see some enduring structures that are still around. They also have there's a site nearby that they sometimes do tours of where some of these canals you can still see. Also, Park of the Four Waters in Mesa is an awesome location, and you can actually see where some of those early canals are still really visible on the landscape. So, yeah,
Very
yeah,
interesting. Thank you very much. Yeah.
yeah, you bet.
So I'm just going through. Um, okay. I think we got a lot of information in that here. I'm not seeing that we have any questions typed out. Let's see. Okay, well, thank you very much for everyone who has joined us today. If anyone's interested in checking out the last year's WAM presentations, also some of the ones you may have missed earlier this month, we're adding those to the ADWR YouTube page, so I'll go ahead and post that link. And let's see. Also going to add a link to our WAM website. So that's through our Arizona Water Facts website. You'll find a lot of information there about upcoming events, also some tips and news to help you celebrate water this month. Let's see, and we can talk about, so let's see, do we have our next presentations coming up on? Okay, so yeah, here are some of the next ones that we have. You'll find ways to register for these events and more information on those on our website. And that I am posting here. Okay. All right. And with that, I'm going to leave it. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you again, Leah, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.